In this training, we are going to be addressing the trust further. We know in the prior training, we mentioned that the trust is the foundation of everything you will be doing. Once you have perfected your title, which removes your contract with the United States via their straw man, you will then from there on be moving in trust. Now, many of you have straw man contracts that you have to cancel. And even when your title has been perfected, you still are free to contract with the United States government via their straw man. Every use of the Social Security number from that straw man is a recontract. And that has to be clearly understood. Some of you have jobs and things like that in place. You can continue those jobs. What a lot of people have found is that they can actually go to their employer, tell them they need to, their status has changed and they need to be rehired. A lot of employers will do that, depending on, how long you've been there, maybe, if, what you're doing is important and so on. But they will actually remove you from their payroll and then add you back in with a new status. And that status would be, you would use the I-9 and the trust that you received through ANPC International, and you would set up your job that way. So you're going to be using the either the EIN number from the trust, or you can also be hired on the the ITIN number on your live-born record, which is through the UPU. So this is important for us to know as far as how we operate. A lot of people's question is, once I get to the private side, how do I move? How do I operate? And it's critical to pay attention to this and listen, because this is where you are going to be operating either in contract with the United States or in private, contracting only through the trust. So again, we've in the former videos explained how the contracting worked through driver's license, marriage license, birth certificate, you name it. So canceling those contracts, we have documents and templates for our premium members that allow you to go in and cancel your state driver's license, your state marriage license. And that's very important. Even those of you that have gotten a divorce, it is still important to go back with that template and notice the vital statistics that you are canceling that marriage license contract, because when you get a divorce, it just creates another contract. It's not canceling it. So these contracts have nothing to do with a marriage between a man and woman. It's basically partnering two of their entities or their trusts together to form a third one, which is the marriage certificate, a bond that's also in trade. So until you cancel that contract, they still have you liable on it, whether you're divorced or whether you're together. It doesn't matter. So keep that in mind as well. Adhesion contracts. Look at every place you may have an adhesion contract and cancel it when at all possible. Now, you want to move in such a way that you do this strategically. Do not do everything at once if it's going to make it so that you cannot be making a livelihood. So be very careful. Do your steps one at a time. Moving in trust. Have your trust set up, created. If possible, have a trust bank account. Now, there's an interesting thing that we should all look at, and that's on the trust bank account. Do you want to have a checking, which is a debit or debt account, or do you want to have a savings, which is a credit account? Now remember, The trust never can bring in income. The only thing it can amass is credits. So, for example, if you get hired at your job on your foreign grantor trust EIN, every paycheck is a credit to the trust. You're never getting income. So anytime you're asked to file or anything like this, your income is always 00000. You can file tax returns, which the proper way would be a 1041-NR. The 1041-NR is basically a template put out by those who create the forms for the Internal Revenue. So it's an editable form you can download. It was put out in 2007. So 1040s never are for foreign entities. It's always the 1041-NR. So you can also create your own substitute 1041-NR because as the company the attorneys that create the forms for Internal Revenue state, they mentioned that there's not forms for every type of trust, which the foreign grantor exempt trust, there isn't an actual form that's good for it because, like we said, most of their forms list income, not credit. So you can actually create yourself an alternate 1041-NR, follow their format, but where it has the blanks for income, you put credits instead of income. Yeah, that's just one important thing to note. So when some places ask for tax filings, you literally can do that, but you can also just leave it with income and fill out all zeros because the trust, again, never has income. Now, you have to realize filing is optional, totally optional. One of our members has received a letter from IRS, and it was called Potential Filing Requirements for trusts. And it went on and it had 2 pages talking about this type of trust. If it's this type of trust, you need to file this way. If it's this type of trust, you need to file this way. Only one sentence in that whole letter had any application to his foreign grantor trust. And that sentence said clearly, in the case of a foreign grantor type trust, can be totally ignored when it comes to tax filing purposes or tax purposes. So we've had multiple members that have also called when they got their CP575 because, it's a form letter and it says, you must file a 1041 by such and such a date. They'll call them, and every time the IRS looks at their trust and says, oh, there's no filing requirements for this trust. So just make a note of that. There are no filing requirements. If you choose to file credits, that's optional. And if it's not done just precisely right, you may get a frivolous filing letter, or you may anyway, just because there's no filing requirements. So just keep all that in mind. Many people have tried, different things and different methods. So, again, that's probably not the most important thing to focus on. Focusing on using that trust in a way that's going to build you a legacy is the most important thing. When you build that legacy, you do not want any ties to corrupt government, corrupt agencies, so you want to be sure that your trust does not create binding contracts with corporations and things like that. And it comes down as simple as how you word your agreements that you have with corporations. With the 2022 trust package, it comes with the tax exception. You receive a tax exception form that can be taken into any business to claim your tax exception. Now, when we're talking about the tax exceptions, it's very important to note as well that you will never be claiming a tax exemption under a state. you're always going to be claiming it under the foreign country that your trust was established. So if you establish your foreign trust in Belize, for example, your two-letter code for the state you're claiming exception is going to be, I believe it's BZ for Belize, or if it's Ghana, GH for Ghana, and so on. You're going to look up the two-letter country code, and that's what you're going to be claiming, and you're going to always make a note foreign. So, another important thing you want to have in place is your trust mission statement and letter of intent. This is very important. You have to have a plan. If you're building a legacy, you cannot just randomly work through this without a plan, and you have to have that on paper. Because if you're moving without that, you know, half these corporations are going to say you're a fake charity, you're a fake ministry, you're a fake whatever. So your letter of intent and your mission statement, you should do two separate pages, one called mission statement of, you know, your trust name, the John whatever Doe Trust, or the Golden Eagle Trust, you know, whatever your trust name is. Now, here's another important thing that you could look at. A lot of people get a trust in their name. If you're going to be working for an employer, you're going to want a 98 trust in your name, preferably. But, however, if you're going to be moving in public, now you have to realize this trust is forever. This is your children, your grandchildren. Everybody is going to be using this trust. You can call IRS and see if you can cancel a trust. These type of trusts, they say no. These trusts are forever. You can shelve them, you can stop using them, but they're always going to be there. Now, in looking at the EINs of the trust after some years, well, at least the way that ANPC International is doing, we can't really speak for other types of trusts, but the way we are doing, coming in with a silver bond, filing the financing statements to fund your trust, within a short time, if you go to a broker and ask them to pull the QSIP numbers on your EIN number, you will see that your trust is funded. You will see that there is an account with X amount of, you know, funds or credits in it. Now, the challenge, of course, is going to be people trying to withdraw that. That's, remember, again, it's always credits. There's not income. So, you know, that's going to be a totally different process, which we are still working on that part of it. However, your trust is still going to show as a creditor in the system because of that funding and that credit. So, as you're moving forward in that trust, like we mentioned earlier, you probably are going to want to have a second trust that has a name of a humanitarian, or a name of, you know, that you're going to be operating in. Something that sounds or looks more humanitarian. Now, I've been told that there's a book that speaks about Rockefeller, who owns 600 of these trusts. We've heard that for some time. And the reason he's using these trusts is because this trust is so flexible. It can literally act in any way. For example, if you read the Internal Revenue Code and you start reading the definitions, the definition of bank, one of them is a trust. This trust can typically literally operate as a private bank. If you look up the definition of the word church, one of the definitions is a trust. This trust can literally operate as a church under Rule 508. If you look up the word unincorporated association, one of the definitions is trust. So this trust can also operate, like we said, as an unincorporated association under Rule 508 with a mandatory exception. Now, when you read the Internal Revenue Code definitions, it mentions that whatever ways you're going to be operating, you need to notify the secretary. And when you look up that definition, secretary, it informs you that that is talking about the Secretary of Treasury. So Your letter of intent, your mission statement, all need to be formulated in such a way that you can send a notice to the secretary, and that notice, preferably, you would be using the affidavit of mandatory tax exception that you're going to receive with your foreign grantor trust in 2022. If you have an older trust and you haven't received some of these other things, you can, send your donation to ANPC and have them add on to the trust. Originally we had, we're separating some of those things out for cost reasons, so it can be purchased separately for older trusts. So just contact, if you need that done, contact the ANPC administration, anpcorders@gmail.com, and request, your affidavit of mandatory tax exception, your tax exemption paperwork that you can take to, say, for example, Walmart, Amazon, different stores like that to get your tax exception. So that's a little bit how that works. Let's get back to working a job with your foreign grantor trust. As we said, that name that you choose on that trust should match exactly what you're working under. It should match your IDs that you have, your private IDs through ANPC International. We've had many, many members get jobs or get rehired even by their employer by doing it this way. So the I-9 that we send you with your foreign grantor trust is important because it has a format that's different than what they're going to hand you. Now remember, on forms, this is an important thing to notice. The word form simply means format. Now you have to realize that any of the forms that they put out, you're allowed to edit those because this is a contract. And a contract is between two parties. Each party has the right to put in what they choose to put in that contract. So let's say, for example, they give you an I-9 form. That's an offer to contract. So when you're filling that out, that's a format, but you have the ability, the option to change any of the wording in that contract before you put it in. It's like a game of tennis. The ball's in your field, then you bounce it back to their field, but you don't just give them whatever it is they say if you don't agree to it, because that's not a fair contract. So carefully read them. You can actually use PDF editors to change the words on some of these formats. You just have to realize that a form is a format, and you are not tied in, and you are not obligated to give any type of agreement that you don't agree with. Some people, rather than editing the form, they'll just strike it out and write in their own handwriting. But whatever's the easiest for you. A PDF editor definitely, looks neater, but again, it's whatever works for you. Now, some of the forms, they have locked. If that's the case, take the original form, print it out, scan it back into your laptop as a PDF, and then you can edit it with a PDF editor. So that's just a couple little tips. We've had members over the years that have contributed that kind of information and help as well, that have been doing this. So we had one member that was hired at a job at a grocery store on the Foreign Grantor Trust EIN, and when they went to issue the computer-generated paychecks that they always issued their employers, the computer popped up and said, "This is a private employee. You must handwrite a check to them." And so that employer actually would handwrite a check, and it wouldn't allow them to withdraw any kind of taxes or anything like that from that account. So that was pretty interesting, that it came through the system that way. It doesn't always, depending on the job and depending on, the part of the system that they work in. But that was just an interesting thing to note, that the computer popped it up and said it was private. So, anyway, that's that part of it. If you can get your employer to remove you out of their payroll and then bring you in as a new employee rehired under your corrected status. Generally, if you go to them and you explain, you had a status correction that needs to be updated, it's not that big of a deal for them to do that. If you have a decent employer, they usually will do that. So remember, don't use their I-9. Use the one that ANPC provides you. Use, for the two types of ID, use your ANPC ID, the blue one, and use the International Driving Permit as your second type of ID. And on our I-9 that we give you, those are listed on the document, acceptable documents. Generally, the ANPC ID would fall under what they call a tribal ID, or an indigenous nation, so it would fall generally under that type of a thing. Sometimes, using your ANPC ID card, they have to enter a pass card, like a passport card, into their system. That's where it'll take that number. It just varies, again, on the systems they're using. So, make notations of that. And the International Driving Permit, of course, our nation went through the UN Secretary General to get approval, just like what it stated needed to be done on the UN Rules of the Road. So the UN Secretary General actually was mailed a physical copy to get approval. So it's that, we've had the approval. Also, the ID cards contain what's called a global record number, just so that you're all aware of how to use these. The United States of America authentication papers, that the top sheet is gold that comes with your ID, is very, very important. That contains the global record number that is on file with all 50 Secretaries of State. Now, a lot of you just take the ID, you don't even look at the papers, you set them aside. But guys, these papers are what validates your ID. It's very important for you to have these. You need these papers. If anybody questions it, and here's an important thing, don't expect to be questioned, because what you expect is generally what you're going to get. So for example, you walk into a bank, you're going to notarize some papers. When they ask for ID, you are going to pull out your ID card, and you are going to pull out the packet of papers you received with it from the Department of State. The whole packet stays together. It does not get separated. So you pull it out and you say, here's my ID, and here's the Department of State papers that go with it. You put it down on the counter. Don't say another word. They can look at it. If they ask, you can say, here's the global record number on file with the Secretary of State. Point out the number. It's on the back of your ID, and it's also on the top center of the Department of State papers signed by John Kerry. Guys, it's very important. A lot of people are not reading their instructions when they receive their ID. They're not doing any of that. Those are the people that come back and say, oh, my ID doesn't work. The ID does work. You're just not reading instructions and not using it properly, not applying what you're supposed to apply to it. So, back to the global record number. We've had a couple instances where, and it was with TSA, one of the instances, and like we know, we found out, we've been told by the Department of State, or by the Secretary of State themselves, that the TSA is considered a rogue foreign agency in the United States. So they're on their own. They're not even following any of the laws. So anyway, you can literally call the Secretary of State's office, and there's a department in there You have to ask for the department that deals with the global record numbers, and you can actually have them look up the global record number that is on the back of your ID, that is on the it's in the original our original one was American National People of the Creator was what that global record number was under. And then ANPC International is operating partnered with the original or as a subdivision basically, due to the fact that American National People of the Creator, we have people in other countries, and the word American made it kind of confined to the United States of America or to North and South America. So ANPC International is the branch that moves internationally, but it still is, part of American National People of the Creator. So if any of you were wondering about that, that's why on your global record number you're going to see that. But the secretaries have been notified. They know how ANPC International is operating as a partnership or as a subdivision. So just to clarify that part. Now, we covered getting a job. Now let's move into the second part where you're going to be operating in the public. Now, we've had people that have decided, we're just going to get just the name trust and we're going to do everything on the name trust. What ends up happening is those people are more likely to run into problems because they're using that name to try to tie it to a straw man in some instances. Now, a trust is a trust and you can operate, but the thing is, in some instances we are finding at banks and whatnot, a name trust, they look down on it versus, let's say you had a Golden Eagle Humanitarian Trust, for example. That is a whole lot more acceptable in their eyes. And again, we know it's just a play on words, but let's say you're coming in that way in the public. Let's say you're coming in with a name trust. So John Ray Doe Trust, you're going to go to Walmart and you're going to try to get a tax exemption as a humanitarian trust. They're going to look at you cross-eyed. That's your name, right? You come in with the Golden Eagle Humanitarian Trust, and they don't look twice at it. It's all in the words. It's all in the words, family. It's all in the words. In the scriptures it says, by your words you'll be justified, and by your words you'll be condemned, and that is for real. When you're operating in trust, when you're trying to operate in equity law versus maritime law, you gotta watch your words. It's incredibly important. The words are everything. Even the words that play in your head. And this is where it gets so tricky, because you literally have to invert everything you've been taught. You've been taught from day one how to be a debtor, how to operate as a debtor in their system. You got to invert everything, and I mean everything we're thinking about, because the trust is coming in as a creditor. When you have a silver bullion bond on file with the state treasurer or federal treasurer, whatever level you've got your bond on file, that is a creditor. The United States is actually using that bond to create credits for themselves. So they're the borrower and you're the lender, right? So that's extremely important for us to realize. Everything you do is upside down. Everything you've been taught is upside down. You can get these little feng shui mirrors that when you look in it, it inverts everything. And that's literally what you're going to have to do, is look at it through that type of a mirror. So once you become a real creditor, you never go in asking for permission. You go in giving orders. And I will say that again. When you are a real creditor, You never go in asking permission. You go in issuing orders in the name of the trust. So the trust is extremely powerful if you know how to operate it. But again, it's like anything else. It can be very powerful, but it has to have an operator. It can't operate on its own. It's a fictitious entity just like everything else. Everything that has a, EIN or ITIN is a fictitious entity. It's just that you have to have an entity that replaces the one that they set up, where they can steal all of your life's energy and labor and everything else. So, again, you can listen to a lot of these webinars and things where they're talking about how to use the Social Security number, what you can do with it. And you always have to look at it with that inverted mirror. Because again, none of these processes can you do in that manner, because everything that you're learning out there about the straw man is for debtors only. Debtors coming in and begging for some crumbs off the boss's table. You have to realize, you have to think like the boss. And that's very difficult for most of us, because we've been very, very, very programmed through the school system, through the churches, through everything. We've been programmed from babyhood to be a debtor. So that's kind of covering that aspect. We'll keep getting, more pieces to this as we move along. But for today, I would like you to think about this, ponder this, and move in trust and move like a boss.